very, very warm welcome to LCC, and it's a great pleasure to see so many of you here tonight. As most of you know, I'm Sandra Kemp, head of college. Tonight we're going to have a debate entitled New Media and the Role of Citizen Journalism, What Changes Have Been Made to Journalism and PR? As we know here at LCC, with our own press and broadcast newsrooms, with our specialisms in journalism, press, PR, media, digital and interactive, this is a perfect place to welcome our panel tonight. Just a couple of years ago, we ran a student project asking our students across the college if they had to rebrand LCC, because we have very recently restructured and changed, as many of you know, what would be a good strapline for the college. And a cross-college group of students, led by creative advertising strategy students and PR students, came up with a great strapline: LCC, no ordinary conversation. Well, I think tonight will be no ordinary conversation, and I'm delighted to hand over to Blottr. This is a collaboration tonight, and a very, very special warm welcome to Blottr, a citizen journalism news service based in the UK, with units across Europe, and I'm sure soon going really global. But I'm handing over now to Milo, our chair tonight, to lead the debate, or for those of you old enough to remember television programme Robot Wars, let the carnage begin.
Thank you very much. I don't think unlike most of the things I'm involved with, I'm hoping this is going to be very simple. So first of all, an apology. I'm having a wall put through in my house at the moment. It's somewhere in the rubble of my glasses. So if I have to sort of look very uncomfortable with paper, you'll forgive me. It's quite brave of Blottr to have me on as a columnist, because I'm quite sceptical about citizen journalism, particularly on grounds of quality and business models. But they've sort of steered away from writing about that. Particularly brave to have a nice guest for them to have me chair this too. But I think what's going to be really interesting is that you have people who know a lot more about the subject than I do to hear from. So I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves in order of Twitter followers. So we're going to begin with with an enthusiastic 157 for Russell Merriman. If you could possibly just very briefly tell us about yourself.
Yes, my name is Russell Merriman. I'm a lecturer here at LCC. So most of those following my students and trying to work out where their next lecture is going to be. I do occasionally tweet about that. There's a room change. But in my previous life, I was editor-in-chief at Al Jazeera English. I was part of the launch team that put the New English Network on air, and we did a lot of work in the new media space with a number of companies around the world, including some you may have heard of, such as YouTube and Live Station. And before that, I was working with the BBC a lot in new media, working on interactive television and with the website and the forerunner of the iPlayer. So
Thank you very much. It's lovely, and it's just the length I'd like the rest of you to keep to. That's all right. Next up on our online fame register is Rama Sharma. If you'd like to introduce who you are and what you do, with 707. Okay. But it's as of about 11 o'clock this morning, so it might be outdated.
That's all right. Though social media is not just Twitter, but we won't go there yet. So I'm Rama Sharma. I'm a senior social media and multimedia trainer for the College of Journalism. So we do a lot of training for domestic and world service journalists, exploring social media and how social media is working for us in journalism. And also, I'm quite excited about the new changes that social media and the new web is going to pose for us as well. So I'm forever kind of saying, hey guys, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Have you seen this? And actually my boss is in the audience, so she will verify that for you. Yes, so other than being a sort of web enthusiast, I think what's also quite interesting from what you might find interesting from a hyperlocal point of view is I was a part of a BBC London hyperlocal project in which I was a tri-media reporter, but I was very much in the grassroots as a district reporter, finding stories and then trying to disperse these over multiple platforms. So from having done that job and now taking account of where we are now, those kind of two worlds have are sort of coming together. So I'm really looking forward to discussing what the others have to say about this, and also hearing your views, and through Twitter and various other platforms.
Thank you. We shall come to the mechanism by which you can communicate with us from the various iPads I see around after we've done the introductions. So next up we have somebody from Blottr proper on 2,900 and something. I've got Adam Baker.
Thank you. I think my mum set up multiple accounts for me, so 2,000 those probably could have done. But by the way, there's a hash which is CJLCC for Twitter.
Well, actually, I've decided to overrule you.
How do you?
Well, I can't even remember it. I mean, I've been signed up to this for about a month, and I can't CL. No. Let's just do hash Blottr, because then people.
Okay, so hash Blottr. If you talk about it on Twitter, hash Blottr, please. That'd be great. So Blottr is a citizen journalism news service that enables anyone to capture and report and collaborate on news they witness. The premise behind it really is that the power of and the scale of the public being able to capture and report news is something that I believe really helps the news industry as a whole. We launched last August. We spent a lot of time over the last 12 months building credibility as a news source. And I'm sure a lot of the questions you'll ask us is about how we authenticate our posts and get credibility, which I'll answer for you. But we've really demonstrated how powerful citizen journalism is. Not more so in the riots. We broke coverage of the riots in Ealing, in Salford, and in actually Woolwich in South East London. Now Woolwich fell completely below the radar of any mainstream news organisation, yet it was the most affected area in the UK for the riots. What we find really interesting are that by enabling the public to capture and report news that they witness, we break mainstream news service mainstream news really fast, really quickly, and often and almost always before mainstream news. We also are able to discover really hyper-local stories from people that are passionate about their local communities. It could be a bus that goes under a bridge and gets stuck under a bridge in Bideford, for example, with a population of 2,000 people. And really that only affects the people in Bideford, but they're passionate about it. So we find that the pace that we're able to break news and our ability to uncover hyper-local stories don't derive from having people report our news for us. And we believe that people at the scene are always best placed to report the news.
Thank you very much. Now coming in at impressive 4,879, we have from the evil side of the fence our PR representative.
Hello, and it's not just the size of counts, my name's Ben. In a very recent former life, I worked at an agency called 33 Digital and ran digital PR and social media campaigns for clients including O2, Microsoft, and probably most importantly for this debate, the Financial Times. So particularly on their website, looking at their iPad, iPhone and other apps. So I think that'll be most relevant here. I'm now freelance PR, and among our projects I worked at Blottr 2012 and run my own PR agency called Right One, which is run by volunteers from the industry, and we do PR on a pro bono basis for charities including Amnesty International, NSBCC, and a few others a bit smaller. So,
thank you very much. For the sake of vanity, I should point out this is where I'm here in the list, but you don't want to hear about me. Finally, we have Mark Stone from Sky, who with some sort of ridiculous five-figure gazillion following, thanks to his sterling work during the riots. We'll hear from him now.
Yeah, I should point out most of those followers are probably Clapham residents, because it went up from...
Nothing wrong with Clapham?
No.
Many happy evenings in Clapham?
It went up from 3,000 to 23,000 on one evening, so most of them are now, and it's now going down every day I look.
Are you particularly boring?
I don't know, I must be, but it certainly gets, you get obsessed with it sometimes, especially when you see it going down and all that. Anyway, I'm Mark Stone, I'm a reporter at Sky News. I've been there for 7 years. I started as a producer at Sky and then made the slightly unorthodox switch to reporting, which so far has worked. Before that I worked for ABC News in America, although in their London office for 2 years and in their Baghdad office for a year. And you mentioned Twitter, so I was a very, very slow convert to Twitter. For years at least a year I couldn't understand what it was all about. I vaguely get it now, I think.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So if you would like to, while the panellists speaking over the next 20 minutes or so, tweeting questions from them based on what you've heard, using the hashtag Blottr. I will attempt to fetch them. And I'll also, because I can't see to the back today, be coming and doing a Jeremy Kyle later, and coming and talking to some of you. So let's start from this end down, and each of our panelists is going to give a brief 5-minute talk about how they feel citizen journalism and social media has affected what they do. So would you like to start us off?
Yeah,
sure. You can go, actually you can't go up to my time, so why don't we do this to save the disruption?
Citizen journalism. So basically 2011 I think has been the most important year in citizen journalism's history because of two key things. The proliferation of news events, which have made it possible for so much news to be out there in general, from the Arab uprisings in the spring rising in early 2011 to the recent London riots. And the second key point there is the proliferation of things like smartphones, not just in the UK but around the world, so we can actually get those news, and that news can be published by citizens the world over. It's become particularly sensitive in recent times with the end of Gaddafi's regime, seeing mobile phones, videos of Gaddafi scrawled over the front of cars, and then certain publications have taken those videos and published them in their papers and online. So, there's nothing left, no one knows what's going to happen. So there might even be some more great examples of citizen journalism which really pushes the debate and pushes the boundaries of what's being made today. I think the key thing to bear in mind with citizen journalism is at the moment I don't think anyone's come up with a kind of sustainable business model around it. So if we want to keep citizen journalism going and accessible to the general public, we need to come up with ways of actually making that sustainable in the long term, especially if we want to keep the quality up, as Milo pointed out. Having said that, there are some great examples of hyperlocal journalism that is sustainable. There's a online magazine in Leeds that's sustainable through advertising and event listings. They do a great job of reporting on the Leeds circuit, basically. But then it still relies on the passion of people who care about their area that they live in, their environment, and care about what's going on there. So that's why they keep it going. I think we increasingly see more examples of hyperlocal journalism picking up, particularly with platforms. So Twitter is a global platform that you can narrow down according to who you follow. So you can narrow down into this debate tonight, and this is hyperlocal journalism in action, really. But then services like Blottr, with its location-based news services, actually, again, narrow it down a bit more to where you are. So there's still new platforms emerging and new ways of communicating. I mean that citizen journalism will continue to evolve in the next few years. I think that's about 5 minutes.
3.5, I think we can deal with that. Rama, would you like to pick up from there? Talk a little bit about Open.
Okay, so at the BBC, we've been using user-generated content in our reports for quite some time. We have a UGC hub-based television centre in which we're constantly looking at what kind of content is coming around from the world, and we go through a very forensic verification process before they go anywhere near our online and television output. So that's the first thing. One of the innovative things that is happening purely because of what's happening in the world is what BBC Persian are doing. So BBC Persian obviously have very minimal rights to broadcast in Iran. So all of and we've got no camera people there, we are totally reliant on UGC content. So all of that content is coming to us, and we're creating programs with user-generated content. And all of that is verified, and it's verified by our expert journalists who've been living there, who now live here, who have got contacts, who know the Tehran so well. So they too help our domestic journalists with verification because they just know the area so well. So what BBC Persian are doing is very, very exciting, and we're learning. The rest of the BBC are learning a lot from what they're doing, just because we don't have reporters out there. We rely on user-generated content. Lastly, we at the college are also involved in lots of experiments in trying to figure out how we can work better with citizen journalism platforms. Recently, I've been playing a lot with Google Plus Hangouts. Can I just have a show of hands who's on Google Plus? Oh, I'm very, very excited about this, and what's quite interesting about Google Plus is they've created these Hangouts which are creating virtual newsrooms. So I know bloggers who are on Google Plus and who are creating these virtual newsrooms, and they're talking about the day's news, and there's not a journalist in sight. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, I want to be there, but I'm also wanting to learn what these guys are doing and why the need to create a virtual newsroom when there are institutions like BBC, like Sky out there. So this is kind of what we're up to at the moment.
Thank you very much. We'll carry this straight on to Mark.
Well, Sky News has been using citizens, not as journalists, but using citizen journalism with a small j, if you like, for years. I mean, the Sky News inbox is there. If anyone who watches Sky News, you'll often hear the presenters saying, email us if you've got any news, and it all comes into the inbox, and we have a viewers editor and various other people, the producers who are on air at the time, will look at that, and anything that is interesting, and a lot of rubbish comes into it that's not even news. I mean, people just email the fact that they don't like, or they do like, some of the presenters, who will remain nameless. So we've used it for years. I think the difference now is that, certainly with what Blottr is trying to do, is that rather than just, we might get a photograph of something, photograph cameras don't necessarily lie or skew the accuracy, but as soon as you start getting people to actually write, citizens to write their own stories, I think the problem then starts that you don't quite know where they're coming from, what their angle is. TV news in the UK has to be entirely impartial. Whether you think it is or not is another story, but by law it is supposed to be entirely impartial. So I think that the problems with citizen journalism come where you're asking members of the public to write articles. I thought it was really interesting what Adam said to me the other day when he was talking about it. I'm sure he'll talk more about it, is the number of people that sign up to Blottr and then the number of people who actually bother to write an article. It's I think 1,000 sign up and one will actually write something. So the fact that it's such a small number that actually writes something would suggest perhaps that actually the person is going to write something that's accurate, but there's no real way necessarily, I can't see, of proving the accuracy. So it's sort of, you split into three areas. You've got people who just upload stuff upload an article or a photograph, and it's sometimes referred to as citizen journalism. I don't think it necessarily is. They're just publishing, with a small p. They are putting something out there because with the aid of a phone, which we've now got, they're able to do, whereas before they weren't able to do it. So that's one level. You've got people who go that little bit further and will be doing it more, presumably, with the likes of Blottr, who are actually trying to do some journalism when they're not actually traditional journalists. And then what you need to have, I think, in order to bring all that together is, I hate to use the word, but proper journalists, people who are trained as journalists, who are integrated, who are getting themselves involved within social media to actually make sense of it all. Because one thing that we've noticed at Sky is that when something happens in London, a bomb scare or something, all the rumour will start on Twitter, it will go on to places like Blottr, and then people will come to the traditional journalists and the traditional news sites to find out what actually happened, what's the truth. Because they think, rightly or wrongly, that that's where they'll find out the accuracy. So I'm sort of not quite sure where I am with citizen journalism at the moment, but I think what Blottr is doing, and I would say this because I'm here, but I genuinely mean it, it's fascinating to be able to turn it into a business model that could work. It's fantastic if it does.
Thanks. I think the key for us is trust. We trust our users because we have to. We're not journalists, but we passionately believe that people at the scene that witness events are best placed to report it, and so we trust them. And what we have developed is an algorithm that enables us to authenticate our posts. So if Joe Blogs down the road comes along and registers on the site and posts a story, we're not actually going to add much credibility to it, but we're all about collaboration. So we don't want one person to come along and add a story and that story just sit there. We want people, 1, 2, 3, 10, 20 people to contribute to the same story. Because at that point, when you've got more than 2 or 3 people contributing to a story, and you've got video, and you've got still images of that incident, you can then begin to build a picture that this is actually credible. A great example, and I hate to use it because Mark's sitting next to me, is there was a bomb scare in May that shut down most of central London, and it started at about 10 o'clock in the morning and shut down Trafalgar Square. And we had the story early. We had it about 10 past 10, about 10 minutes after it started. And we had a video of a police, the bomb disposal experts with their robot dismantling this bomb. And then we had about 3 or 4 other people come along over the course of about 20 minutes and add to the story, both in terms of textual but also in terms of footage and stills. And there was nothing anywhere else on the web about it, but there was lots of noise. Lots of people talking about it on Twitter, lots of people talking about it on Facebook. You searched for Bomb Scare London on the day, and it all led to our particular place. We got lots of traffic for it. But interestingly, across Twitter, people were actually tweeting us, saying, "Why are you scaremongering? Why are you making this up? The BBC haven't got it." And that's really, really interesting, because there was video footage. There were 3 or 4 people that had submitted content to that story. Yeah, because the BBC didn't have it, it wasn't true. 2 hours later, at 12:15, the BBC and Sky broke it as their breaking story. For me, that tells the power of citizen journalism. But we've got to get credible, and for us, our challenge is how do we get that credibility? And I think Mark's absolutely right. How do you trust the public? But we have to trust the public. We're forced to do it. And I believe that if somebody takes the time to either download our app or go onto our site, capture footage and report it, then we have to trust. We have to find a way of trusting them and getting our community to authenticate the story. What is really interesting, and Ben mentioned about smartphones, is technology, both mobile and web, have changed the game. Everybody now has the ability to be a citizen journalist, whether you've got a smartphone, whether you've got a camera, whether you're on the web. If you've got those things, you've got the ability to be able to report news yourself. And social media has changed the game, because in 2 ways. Not only are people now able and sort of accustomed to using Facebook and Twitter and all of the user-generated news services that are out there, like Flickr, for example, they're used to engaging, they're used to adding their content to stuff, blogs and whatever else social means. People are now used to adding their own contributing their own content. And then flip that from the distribution angle. Twitter for us and Facebook to some extent is absolutely brilliant in terms of being able to distribute our stories. So we find people talking about incidents that we've got a story for. It's great for being able to reach out to those individuals talking about it. So social media and technology have changed the game. I don't think we would be able to have made as much traction as quickly as we have without social media and definitely without technology. Just so you know, today we're in 9 UK cities. We launched into France 2 weeks ago and into Germany last week. So our growth could only happen on the web. We wouldn't be able to do it anyway. But it does come back to trust. We are forced to trust our users. And we see in many instances that we're able to break news really quickly. Gaddafi last week, we had an image of Gaddafi after he was shot. I think, and I haven't seen otherwise, but it was the first image of anyone to have in Europe. We had 8 minutes after it was taken. And we know that because when the photo was uploaded onto our site, it had a time and date stamp on it. So if you look on our site and you look for, is this the first image of Gaddafi, the story, you'll see the time and date stamp on it. And we time and date stamp everything, so you'll see when that was posted. Now, 8 minutes from taking that image of Gaddafi being shot to coming onto our site, that's power. And you can only get that by enabling people at the scene to report their content.
Thank you very much. Impressive pitch for the virtues of Blottr. Let's move on to Russell, please.
Thank you very much. I was just looking along the panels as they were giving their little introductions there, and I think I've realised that I'm the oldest on the panel. I'm a great fan of social media and new media. I've been working in it for much of my career, but I think with all the gushing that's going on here, I'm going to have to take the role of new media bad boy here, or members of the
I was hoping you would.
That's why I've been asked here. 8 minutes it took for the Gaddafi picture to be uploaded, 10 minutes before it was a mashup. It was already something else to chip paper, digitally. It's amazing what can be done with digital media these days. The sheer flow of information, the speed of information, is unprecedented, and all of the panellists have alluded to the way in which that information flows. I started in journalism in the days before computers. That's something I really ought to admit about new media. But that was the situation when we had we wrote everything on typewriters. We recorded our radio on quarter-inch tape. We recorded our television on 16mm film, and we had to get it developed. In some cases, at the BBC and regional television, we got our stills developed at Boots. Those were the days. Having said that, we still got news. Citizen journalists still took the time to pick up the phone and ring us and talk to a reporter and say, I've just seen this happen. And if there was a programme on air, if you were in local radio, you put them on air and get them to describe it in breathless terms. And then a reporter would be dispatched. And they would then be dispatched with a radio car or a tape recorder and come back with the news, and the news would be gathered. Citizen journalism, one could say, is news gathering on the cheap.
Don't let me stop you.
I know, I'm not, well, I'm just going to keep going. You need some debate.
So I've got a clock.
For instance, let's take the shooting of Osama bin Laden. It came out in a tweet. Keith Urban, former chief of staff to Donald Rumsfeld, tweeted, "So I'm told by a reputable person that they've killed Osama bin Laden. Hot damn," as only an American can. But who owned that Twitter account? Was it Keith Urban, former chief of staff to Donald Rumsfeld? It could have been Donald Rumsfeld who owned that account. It could have been Osama bin Laden who was sitting on a yacht in the Seychelles. Who knows? Only until the journalist went up to Keith and asked him, well, that tweet changed the world, and Keith said, actually not. And did we verify, a proper journalist, when we verified the story that Keith Urban was the owner of said tweet? He didn't think it was journalistically massive, but in terms of new media, it's still being talked about, probably used in many lectures today. What would any journalist do? Well, you can go on Google. Nowadays, you go into Google, you type in Keith Urban, you look on the Google search, and if you want an image, it will show you an image of Keith Urban, but it will also show you an image of Donald Rumsfeld and Osama bin Laden. Which do you believe? Which do you trust? How do you know? You have all that information, too much information almost. And there is an argument that says that a journalist who has, or a PR person who has too much information isn't doing their job properly. They should be filtering it, because that's their job. So, this premise that I have is that potentially all of this social media is a cheap way of finding that news out. I've seen it happen time and time again. There was a good example recently where a friend of mine who lives in Belgrade tweeted about the house of Ratko Mladic's son being searched. It was a couple of years ago now. It was just after Radman Karadzic had been caught wearing a rather strange disguise. And she said, they're still searching after all these years. Within a few hours, that had become a story on the BBC website. Serbia's hunt for million organs. They'd seen the tweet, got in touch with her. She happened to be a freelance journalist, so I hope she got paid for it. But that became a news story on that day's news website. There was a quote from an unknown journalist in The Guardian that I think summed it all up. We used to need hunter-gatherers in journalism. Now we maybe will need farmers in the future. And it's the changing relationship between the audience and the journalists and the content providers, whether it be Blottr or whether it be the BBC or Sky, that's changed. That's the real thing that's changed. The information hasn't really changed. What constitutes news hasn't changed. It's that relationship between the audience and the broadcasters and the newspapers that's changed. And Blottr is part of that change. It's giving people another platform to be able to do that. It's only 2 weeks since I was over at the LSE watching another new media platform based on video being launched with similar kind of aspirations. So these things are very easy to set up. Whether they can be sustainable in this cutthroat business world where nobody wants to pay for content online is another matter, and I wish you the best of luck with that.
I'm going to cut you off there. We're going to come back to you. One question before we get into the things I've prepared that I think you'll find interesting. This idea of speed keeps coming up. It's just assumed that it is better for you to know about something 8 minutes after it happened rather than 30. I mean, let me ask Adam. I mean, who really cares? I mean, it doesn't really affect me whether I find out that Gaddafi's dead at 4:12 in the afternoon or 4:45. Why should I care that you break it sooner? I mean, what I want, presumably, is a story that actually is complete and well-researched and well-written. Why should I care that you get it first?
I think that having an accurate story is completely more needs to be parroted. I mean, that's traditional media do very well. They're investigative and they're more analytical in the way they produce news. I think that having it early helps. And it helps us for sure, because if we were late to the table of news, somebody like, if Sky News had broken that story first, then I'm pretty sure that we would get no traffic for it, because everybody would be going to Sky. The fact that we're able to break news quickly means that we get a lot of credibility, and we're able to deliver a fairly important news story first.
So that credibility question is interesting. We're going to come back to that. And perhaps Ron will be a good person to talk to you about process journalism when we do. So let's do my mole routine now and go to okay. Actually, I'm going to come to Ron first. What I want to ask you is, there's obviously a massive appetite for this sort of citizen journalism content because these sites are getting great traffic. And what I want to do is separate out the business question just for a second and just look at what's being produced by the media groups versus these sorts of sites. Now, all of the major media groups, all the big newspapers, they've all wrapped up the quantity of stuff they're churning out in this world where everybody wants more content faster. But what are you getting so wrong that means that there's a need for sites like Blottr? And why aren't you catering for people adequately? Why are these other things growing up around the sides? Because let's say the BBC, the Telegraph, Guardian, Sky, they don't seem to be meeting the demand.
I think there's truth in that. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the time we don't meet the demand. I mean, I'll use the BBC London reference, for example. London itself is so diverse, and the people in London have not just sensibility to the domestic agenda, they also have an international agenda. I mean, even if you take my example, my parents are interested in Indian news as well as what's happening on their street, as well as what's happening in the world. Now, if they turn on BBC London, or even if they turn on Sky or any of these services, they're not going to get everything that they want from one service. That's a given. So what then happens is you have a blogger on the street who's going to give them what's happening on their street, who's going to give them a bit of flavour of that particular community as well. You know, so
why
the point is...
Why shouldn't the BBC, with this enormous budget, this vast army of
I'm not sure about that anymore.
Well, I think that even post-cuts, it's a sort of guaranteed income other media groups dream about. We hear a lot about all these layers of middle management in the BBC, and I don't really want to get into that, but it does have an enormous budget. I mean, surely it could do the job.
Well, could it do the job? It's doing a lot of things. And the reason why the BBC haven't been covering the stories I've been mentioning is because that is the job of the local papers. So we've also been very sensitive to what other news journalism outlets are doing. So if we started becoming really hyper-local, the newspaper journalists and the local papers were complaining about it, and so we have to be sensitive to that as well.
Yep.
We are a public service broadcaster after all.
Lovely, thank you. You said
I don't know if anyone reads The Guardian online, so Guardian.co.uk, but they've recently launched a feature which is live blogs. So if there's a big news event that you know is coming up, I guess Wimbledon was one of them, London riots, they set up a live blog. That's actually quality journalists covering events as they happen. So it's someone sitting there getting content from around the web and sourcing it and checking the content to make sure it's accurate and publishing it as quick as possible.
So both The Guardian and Telegraph seem to be quite good at that.
And they do that as well?
Yeah, they're both quite quick off the mark. I don't know about Sky, I'm sure they do as well.
But it came from...
They both seem to be quite... They don't do so much.
No, not really.
No, I mean, the Telegraph and The Guardian both are very happy with the page results they get, because they're both really enthusiastic about jumping on events and throwing one of their newsroom guys and just collecting everything they can.
Yeah, and I think if you know something is coming up and there's a big debate coming up or there's a big event coming up, then you can prepare for that to have a live blog up, advertise it to your readers, and then when the actual event that takes place, you can we can actually trust the content that's going up there. And I think that's something that lots of people will perhaps struggle with, is if they've got that first picture of Gaddafi, he came in and after it was taken, you still have to verify that if it's accurate. So you're not necessarily first if it's a fake picture. And I'm sure there's all kind of legal.
Let's talk about that. Adam, how do you replace the editor, the newsroom editor? How do you, because in order to be responsible, you must have something between you and what you publish. Otherwise, really, all you're doing is just hosting, a site where it's almost like a sort of network of WordPress blogs where anybody can come in and write whatever the fuck they want. What do you do? What is sitting in between me as a sort of mischievous person who comes along and posts a story that's riddled with factual errors and horrible kind of nasty interpretations of things? You've read my columns. What sits between me and your readers?
An editor. So we have an editor in-house. We don't necessarily moderate. Again, we trust our users. So if it's offensive, malicious, or libelous, we'll remove it. We look, if there's a story that clearly, like the Gaddafi story, and it comes in and it's clearly going to be a big story, we will try to authenticate it as best as we possibly can. So we'll look across Twitter to see if people are talking about it, for example. In fact,
is that authentication, checking Twitter?
No, not really. Not authentication, but it gives us a sense of what else is going on.
Okay.
You've got a thing next to
a really good example was Gaddafi a few weeks ago when he allegedly was killed. It was on a Sunday, and we had that story really early. And we didn't publish the story because we couldn't verify it. We didn't know he was dead. But as soon as we got this story, we got this image, we went onto Twitter, we went onto other news services, we tried to reach out to people that potentially that we know, very difficult obviously in that instance, and to get to a point where we're comfortable enough that that's actually happened.
But that took you 8 minutes, you said, because he said the time at which in 8 minutes you managed to get to the stage where you were comfortable enough to publish it. The reason I say it is because Sky got that image as well, maybe not as soon as you, I have no idea, but it took us a long time, probably an hour and a bit before we decided to put the image on air. Yeah. The BBC took even longer because because I think their levels of checks their standards are different, not better, just different.
And you seem to be suggesting that they're more rigorous than you.
No, I'm not suggesting they're more rigorous at all. I'm just saying that Sky has a side issue now, but Sky has the view that if it's a developing story, the viewer is aware that it's a developing story and therefore will understand that the facts might change.
So are you edging towards...
Whereas the BBC will always wait until they have got as many of the facts as possible before actually going with the story.
Will they get it wrong?
Sky will always treat the viewer as a grown-up and they'll know that actually it's a developing story, things will change as they're going on. But that specific image, I'm intrigued about that because... to start with, you were taking as gospel that the image, if anyone hadn't seen it, was like a video, it's a still of a video clip from Gaddafi. It had the time code on the bottom from the video camera. But from what you said, you're assuming that time was correct to start with.
Sure, we
So
are.
that's an assumption that...
But he was reported dead about 10 minutes before that. So
Right.
it couldn't have been much longer than that. So if there was a time limit, it just couldn't possibly be much longer than that because he didn't die much before that. That was published 8 minutes after it was taken. Now, we took the view to keep it on there because it was an early photo and we knew it had been shot. And we then reached out to the person that submitted it to try to verify that individual, and we had a communication with them. And at that point, having spoken to the user, we took the view to publish it. And I think we were right to do so on the basis that you then, Sky News had it, and other
I think what we can see in a funny sort of way is cascading with exclusion with you. Cascading in that direction is sort of a hierarchy of levels of kind of checks and rigour before things go out. And it seems like Sky's been kind of slightly sort of drawn in the direction of process journalism, get it out there and correct it afterwards. Perhaps very slightly, or maybe that's their original sort of philosophy. You could tell us a little bit about that. But it seems to me like we've got a bit of a cascade out. Can I ask you one question? I'll come right back to you.
I've got to say that PR is very accurate research we did to come up with our...
Well, you don't have to break stories. It's fine. You're the people providing these stories. So you've got as long as you want. So it's fine for you. Anyway, I'll come back to it in a second. What I wanted to ask, just Mark, before we move on, is we've heard about sort of people coming to mainstream outlets because they trust them, because there's a greater level of checking that goes on. Do people really trust the press after the hacking scandal? I mean, your own organisation has very close connections and some sort of ownership whatever. You know, I mean, you're unfairly characterised as part of the Murdoch empire. I mean, you know, should we trust a word that you say in light of News of the World? Yes. Why?
You said you weren't going to trip me up.
Well, I think that if you're coming to public debate from a Murdoch-connected organisation at this point in time, you should expect a question about that.
Well, yeah. I mean, the first thing to say is that you know, as I said before, we are obliged to be impartial where newspapers are not. That's one issue. But also, I think if there is a level of trust, then yes, naturally, I think the public will trust a news organisation, be it the BBC, Sky, or the News of the World, that was more than they will trust a member of the public just posting something on Twitter.
Do you think those trust relationships are sort of granular in between? Do you think people have an idea of who they think is more trustworthy? I mean, I hear a lot of people say they think the BBC is very trustworthy despite its bias. Generally gets the facts right. Or do you think people kind of split between, you know, the media and all those other, which would include Blottr?
No, there's absolutely
a hierarchy.
I think
where do you think Sky is?
Right up there at the top.
Me too, actually. Sky is my television station of choice. I'm being very unfairly mean to you. All right, you wanted to come in, didn't you?
Yes, I had a question. When I was listening to Adam, he was talking about verification, and all of a sudden, Blottr sounds like a news organisation.
Well, I was thinking that too. It's almost like they're reinventing the newsroom without all of the kind of expensive legacy stuff that all the other media groups have got. Aren't you really just starting a new media group? Just like all the others, except you're a bit more agile, a bit smaller, and a bit more responsive. You would?
We'd love to.
So what is citizen journalism? Because if you're a citizen journalist organisation, yet what you really are is a kind of like a Sky without, or a BBC without the baggage, without all of the expense. What is citizen journalism? Because presumably you wouldn't class your editor as a citizen journalist, and if we accept that all the people submitting stuff are just like publishers, what is citizen journalism?
So we're a news service, absolutely.
Okay, so you think of yourself more like Associated Press?
No, we're a news service. I see us as a news service like Sky and the BBC, but we're powered by people. We don't have journalists. So we deliver a news agenda powered by people that contribute our content for us and report news stories that they witness.
I have another question.
Yes.
It also strikes me, if it's people-powered journalism, aren't you just talking about tech people that are quite techy, people that are using their mobile phones? So it's news coming from a specific group of people and not actually...
Sort of a metropolitan elite of people
right,
who've got smartphones, people who are smartphones. Well, actually, my next question was going to be on subject. I'm going to ask you this, Adam, but I'm going to broaden the question a little bit. I absolutely want to hear about this because it does seem like it's quite a self-selecting group that would be generating the news if we could head towards this model. But also, what safeguards do you put in place to prevent people who write perfectly factual stories but have personal hobby horses? I mean, my worry about something like Blottr being a kind of preeminent news service would be that we would be totally inundated with stories from minority special interest groups, even more so than the BBC is today. We would be completely overwhelmed by news from people who have vested interests. And how do you protect against that? How do you judge newsworthiness when everybody contributing to your site obviously has an interest in writing a story, otherwise they wouldn't be doing it? And if you could also address what Ram said as well, I'm really interested in those three things.
Yeah, sure. So, Rama, my mum is 69 and she's got a Nokia. She's not anywhere near clued up on technology, but in fact she doesn't write for us, but she could. So you don't have to be somebody in the tech sector to write for us. In fact, knowing the demographic of our users, very, very few tech people write for us. What that is, I don't know, but they don't. So, to answer your question, the first part of that question, Mona, was...
Well, if we could deal with this first, and then the other two things are how you safeguard against sort of single-issue minority interest groups, and how you judge general newsworthiness, which presumably...
So the second part of that question is fairly If somebody thinks that, or believes what they're providing is newsworthy, who are we to say that it's not?
Well,
so for example, if somebody reports that a bus has got stuck under a bridge, okay, and they go to the trouble to report that, and they provide footage of that, that's news. Okay, so we determine that actually we trust our users, and that's newsworthy to them.
Do you think it's fair to say that one of the characteristic differences between you and the big media groups is that you seem to embrace your readers, whereas the big media groups are a little bit afraid of them?
No, I think we trust our users. I think, but I don't actually think this is a negative on the mainstream part. I think the BBC and Sky, they are very well respected news services. They're very traditional, a lot of heritage. They have to protect their brands. They can't be seen to do what we're doing. We are passionate about letting people produce news. But the point we start to think more towards the mentality of the Sky News and the BBC, we're probably going to close it up, which will never happen.
But I think one of the problems with you trust your users, but do the general public want to read what your users are putting up there?
Well, so 1 million uniques a month says they do.
But then Sky has however many million as well. So I'd probably rather trust a story or want to read a story that Adam's written or research. Mark's written research rather than someone on the street has done when a bus hits a bridge.
Sure.
Even if it's half an hour later. Just because I trust the quality, the source of the content to be accurate compared to.
I'm actually going to cut that off because we've heard quite a lot from our triumvirate in the centre, and I'm very keen to hear what these two have to say as well. Can I just get your response to what's been discussed so far from the point of view, somebody who has a kind of overview of journalism, almost partly from working in the industry for a very long time, you obviously have a good overview of the history of the industry, and also as somebody who perhaps talks about journalism more in the abstract. What's going on here? What's interesting out there?
Oh, it's lovely to see the big boys bullying the newcomers in the playground, isn't it? The big bad mainstream media having a pop at the new boy on the block. That's part of what's going on here. But the BBC and Sky and a lot of other mainstream media organisations, they talk about trust.
because we can now communicate directly with the public. We can relate with the public directly, which is the whole premise of public relations in the first place. So why go to a BBC or Sky when you can reach a million people if you've got a very strong Twitter feed, or something you've got such a good bit of content that people share it for you. So actually, we're increasingly, I think, getting more towards the core of what public relations is meant to be, which is relating to the public on behalf of an organisation or a brand or a person. But that doesn't mean that it's not more important. I think it's in a very difficult position when it comes to PR. PR seems to have taken off as an industry in recent years. I think we now far outweigh the number of journalists there are, which is problematic.
I mean, in Silicon Valley, there are, the last thing I read was that you take all the journalists in Silicon Valley and you add all of the tech bloggers, and you add all of the people who contribute casually to the major tech blogs in Silicon Valley. PR's outnumbered journalists by something like 6 to 1, right? Which seems insane to me.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get things like journalism, which has been a buzzword bandied around, which is where journalists are increasing pressure to serve more stories, to get more traffic, to get more eyeballs. But then to do that, they have to sit at their desks, take the content that PRs and other sources are feeding them, and then just regurgitate it word for word. So actually, it's interesting that we're in a debate about citizen journalism, because then citizen journalists would presumably begin playing a small part of what the journalists used to play when, as Russell said, they used to go out and get the stories. Now, with the sites like Blottr, citizen journalists are sending content in, which actually is probably a bit more unbiased than the PR stories that are trying to be sold in. So it's an interesting turning point. I don't think PR industry will keep writing forever, but I think we've got a whole other area now which is outside the media more broad.
Certainly a burgeoning area in Facebook marketing and stuff like that. We've got companies like Social and Sports Media Slash.
Yeah, I think basically PR seems to have kind of taken hold of social media.
Yeah, it's endlessly boring.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're like way over time, which is, I'm sorry, it's entirely my fault, but I hope this has been interesting, and we're going to come to questions in just a second. I've got a couple of very quick fire questions.
Can I just make one point?
Yes.
There was some data released recently that said 89% of journalists use social media to do PR on their own articles.
Well, we all do. I don't think that's a bad thing.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing.
One interesting concept is if journalists have targets to get number of viewers to their articles. So
the Blottr model.
Yeah.
We could have had a 4 hours debate on this, I know, but unfortunately we have a limited number of time, so I want to give you the opportunity to ask questions. Before we do that, Ron, how are we going to make journalism pay for big media organisations in less than 2 minutes? How are you going to make journalism pay for itself? How are we going to do it?
Can we go
Because if you don't know, you must be at the forefront, the bleeding edge of research into the business side of things. I mean, how's it going to happen?
Well, no, actually, that's not my job technically. But how can we connect this? I mean, for the BBC, as long as we provide trusted content, I think we'll always have users. But we're not, as I've already said, taking what's happening on the web lightly. We're very much trying to.
I mean, if you look at the vlog stadium, Twitter, these are predominantly left-wing people.
Well, I mean, it depends how well the likes of Blottr do, but I mean, I think one thing that we've got one broad point, which is kind of what you're saying, is that we shouldn't make an assumption that the likes of Blottr are any sort of threat, that they should be seen as an addition to the market, not as a replacement, not as a threat. So I don't think it'll have any impact on the political spectrum at all, because the traditional market will still be there, they'll just be an addition to it.
So talking about Blottr and business behind Blottr, isn't the time when you could build a news organisation on the basis of unpaid contributors and then find a way to make that money and then sell the business, like post-Huffington Post? I mean, people got hate that idea. Isn't that over? I mean, are you a bit worried about the future of your business?
No, not at all. I think that if we started this 5 years ago, we wouldn't have anywhere near the traction that we've got today. And I believe that we're a great platform for journalists that can't get their work published, students that want to build a portfolio, people that are intelligent enough to write good articles. and we're a great platform to get that published. But we're also, and where our mainstay business is going to be, is about enabling people to capture footage that they're witnessing. At that point, we don't need to pay them because they're not journalists. They have no aspirations to be a journalist. They've just been at the scene at the right time and captured something.
Okay, and finally, what most annoys you about this whole? You were talking very entertainingly in your 5 minutes or so about some of the changes that are taking place. What do you find to be the most annoying or troubling, worrisome thing that's happening in journalism right now?
Most of our audience are funnier than we are. And some of them are actually more talented. I think that the only reason we haven't got an X Factor for journalists is because it's very difficult to translate.
We're not good looking.
They're not good looking, no. I mean, look at me, perfect face for radio. But in that respect, there are actually some very, very good writers out there that we simply haven't discovered yet. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see how many of those come through platforms like Blottr, through Twitter, and through Blottr as well. And again, photographers. There are so many people out there now who have the capacity, they have the capability, and they have the talent, but they haven't been through the traditional routes of training, or they haven't done indentures with studios, things like that. But it's an opportunity for them to get their work out there. And I think that is potentially very valuable, very exciting. But again, for my students, Blottr is a very good way for them to get there. I mean, okay, you're infringing on my manner now with the Arts London News, but it is an opportunity for people to get their names out there and actually show what they're made of. And if they've got the wherewithal and the talent and the writing ability to do it, good luck to them.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to come down to questions to you. There's no overestimating how bad my eyesight is. So I'm going to come down and find some people with questions. Who has questions? You have a question. Now, the additional... I've got it here. The additional advantage of me coming is I can repeat the questions over here.
You were talking about the riots and about how, basically about how we shouldn't public or whatever else, but basically the police actually based their investigation on what they heard over BlackBerry Messenger and what they heard on Facebook. They even thought about shutting it down. So surely citizens are actually speaking to the news. I mean, I'd rather believe somebody who's my neighbour who's telling me all this information than somebody on the TV who I've never met or never actually been introduced to. Like, who are they to me, or who are they to the public?
Rama, do you agree that most people would rather trust news that they get from somebody along the road, or do you think that they want the carefully kind of researched and curated stuff you get from the BBC?
I think they want both, actually. I think a lot of times they hear things on Twitter and social media, and then hear about it and then turn to the BBC or Sky or whatever organisation and want verification. I absolutely agree with the fact that we can't underestimate recommended content. What your friend tells you, what your mother tells you, what people that you know tell you is very, very important. So that's why we're on Facebook and all of these platforms, so that people share our content.
Who on the front row has a question? You must have a question. Or you have a question. Ask us a question. There's so many incredible, fascinating points that have been made. What would you like to see expanded?
And I wonder how much of the kind of styles, techniques, perceptions we have here, which are not any of the students, any of you talked about, but which actually contribute to the way we look.
Yeah. So it's a question about perspective. Let's go to Adam.
I mean, a really good point.
How much do you think that what you're doing could affect the way that things are reported, in their entirety, like the whole point of view of the story? Like, how about the riots not really being a story about people causing trouble, or being poor, or whatever? Actually, this was really a story about how incompetent and useless the police are, and the riots are just an example of how we've really got to reform the police force.
Yeah. So we actually had some coverage on that, on the police and their role in the riots. So we can approach it from a completely unbiased perspective, and we want a rounded view of whatever goes on. So with the riots, when we had somebody report on the police, and it was great for us. Most of the footage we had clearly wasn't around the police, but we encourage it. We want a full view. We don't actually have ourselves a voice. It's our users and our community that have that voice. We sit on the fence completely. We're totally unbiased.
Has anybody got a question about PR? Because Ben hasn't had a chance to speak very much. But you were so interesting and eloquent, I feel like we should have heard more from him. Anybody?
MAPR?
Anybody want to go into PR? Everybody hates PR. If you don't make it into journalism, then you can get it.
Most of the others.
Do you have a question? I can't see you. Go for it. Shout! You'll have to shout loud.
Do you think it's fair as a PR student for ex-journalists entering our industry?
Oh, that's interesting. So he's a PR student. He wants to go into PR. He feels like a lot of the best jobs are being snapped up by ex-journalists, and who wouldn't want them, right? They're well connected. They're articulate. They know exactly what journalists want. Is that a problem?
Yeah, it's not a problem. They come in, and I've met quite a few ex-journalists who come over PR. They come in and bring their connections with them, so they can practically guarantee their clients' coverage in certain publications. They're very eloquent, as you said, very good at writing copy. But actually, again, some of the work that goes on behind the scenes with campaigns, which often the journalists don't see, they won't touch really, because there's sort of very, I think there's a great professional skill in PR that journalists don't have, and it's developed as you enter PR as a brand. It's coming up with angles and insight into content that the public want. I think the media, not all media, but often reflects what the public want, whereas the PR industry has to try and create angles and interests around stories that the public necessarily doesn't want.
They don't know that they're interested in things.
They don't know.
Because fundamentally, a lot of the time, you're advocating on behalf of clients who aren't particularly interested. But you do have a great skill in the PR industry in making things interesting.
Well, it's also
in a way you're sort of manipulating the journalists into it's sort of a.
If you think about Blottr, media probably wouldn't cover Blottr when it was small, but with I'm sure with a great PR team, they can come up with stats like the traffic growth, highest growing news service in the UK, 20% month to month. It's a great line that journalists will be interested in hearing, and might not necessarily hear it because they're too busy with their other work to actually hear about the story. So I think PR obviously gets a bad rep. There are plenty of bad PRs out there, but there are plenty of good ones, and I think most of them are pretty bad, but there's lots of ex-journalists that aren't as good as the great PR people out there. So I think that's still very relevant to get PR.
I don't think they get enough credit. Right, and we need a question for Mark. And one thing that we haven't really talked about is his incredible work in Riot. So would anybody like to ask a question about the videos that he did, or how Sky felt about him almost becoming a citizen journalist? In fact, I'm going to ask this question. How did Sky feel about you sort of becoming a citizen journalist for the night? Were they happy? Were they angry? What happened?
Well, it was interesting because I live in Clapham, so I had two hats on. If you like. I was the journalist, but I was also the angry resident, seeing my neighbourhood being trashed. And at the time, that sort of paradox didn't really occur to me. But looking back, it was quite clear that I was irritated by what I was doing, and that was reflected in the questions, perhaps not the questions, but the tone of the questions that I asked. Now, there will be people naturally who think that I overstepped the line, perhaps, of impartial journalist. I don't think I did. My bosses didn't think I did, because what these guys were doing, without debating why they did it, what they were doing was illegal. And naturally, when you're questioning someone who's doing something illegal, you're going to challenge them, and that's exactly what I did. And ultimately, I was asking the questions that the viewers at home wanted. It wasn't something to ask.
The gap. The difference is, you're asking those journalists questions about illegal behaviour, but you've got this extra edge of anger because it's your neighbourhood, and that's perhaps where the sort of citizen journalism element of it creeps in. But if anything, I kind of saw that as a positive, because particularly the one when Superbar, and that was fantastic. It really helped to explain to people, I felt, how mindless and awful behaviour going on the streets was, which a lot of the other organisations couldn't do because they couldn't even get in there.
Yeah, I mean, it was there were differences in the different videos and in the questions I asked. And actually, interestingly, at one point I was asked by one of the looters who I was talking to whether I was a journalist, and I said no, because had I said yes, he would have lamped me. There was no doubt about that. So I said, no, I live here and I'm astounded by what you're doing. So it was difficult to cover that, but it was the only way to do it. I mean, if you went in there with a broadcast camera this size, you wouldn't last 1 minute. So it was the only way that you could actually get the footage up that close. And it was inside Curry's at one point as the guys and girls were taking their tellies and all that sort of stuff.
Lovely, and we have 2 minutes left, and we're running very over time. I'm sorry, I think I have a video to show at the end. So, from my favourite panellists at the end, anything that you are desperate to say?
I think it's worth remembering, and I was watching your pictures sitting in a hotel room in Mallorca going, good on you. Yeah, because it really was news on the front line. It was so, the footage was raw, it was shown as it came in. Great, that's how news gathering should be. I want to just finish with a couple of points. Journalism began as citizen journalism. It's how the pamphleteers of the 16th century began their trade. When it was cheap enough to be able to print stuff, they started putting out news sheets, basically. So journalism comes from citizen journalism. It's like we're now going full circle with all of that and embracing journalism's roots, almost, that would be ours roots, to a certain extent. And I'm going to finish as kind of the bad boy of this panel. I'm going to see whether our colleagues from the mainstream media and Blottr will have a bet with each other that within a year, somebody on the mainstream media news report starts their report with the words, "News of this story broke on the citizen journalism platform Blottr."
Well, it can always be arranged.
I'm sure that both of our titans from the mainstream media will agree that thanks to their rigorous application of journalistic principles, they will have no problem whatsoever in attributing a story that broke on Blottr to the website. So I don't even need to ask them.
Attribution is another whole issue.
I know, but we only had an hour. Let's just thank the panellists, if that's all right. They've been fantastic. Follow them on Twitter. We have something to watch after, but I have no idea what this is, so it's weird party political broadcast. I can only apologise.
So just before I start, this is I think we're going to show this. So this is a 2-minute collage of footage that's been submitted by users on Blottr. The last piece of footage is fairly horrific from the Mumbai blasts early this year. So if you are easily offended, you can look away. It lasts for about a minute and a half.
While we're waiting, a room full of budding journalists, I'm very disappointed with your Twitter activity. We've had lots of people tweeting. We've had quite a lot of them, but we haven't had any really obnoxious questions, and that will be your job. So step it up.
Don't knock it. I got one extra follower tonight.
I got 7. What's that?
Go away. I can't